Welcome to Crime Time Inc. My name is Alex, and I'm your host for today's episode, episode 23 in our Charles Manson series. The Manson trial has been a relentless barrage of horrific details and courtroom theatrics. After a brief 3-day recess for the State Bar Convention in early September 1970, Prosecutor Vincent Buliosi returned to court not just with his legal arguments prepared, but with a deeply unsettling phone call weighing on his mind. The shadows of intimidation were stretching towards his witnesses. On September 10th, when court reconvened, Buliosi addressed Judge Older and the defense attorneys in chambers. His words were stark. One of our witnesses, Barbara Hoyt, has left her parents' home. I don't have all the details, but the mother said Barbara received a threat on her life, that if she testified at this trial, she would be killed, and so will her family. Buliosi made his position clear. I know two things. I know the threat did not come from the prosecution, and it did not come from an aunt I have that lives in Minnesota. I think the most reasonable inference is it came from the defense. He then issued a direct warning. I'm bringing this out because I want the defense attorneys and their clients to know that we are going to prosecute whoever is responsible for subornation of perjury. When our witnesses take the stand, I will do my best to bring out in front of the jury that they received threats on their lives. It is relevant. I suggest the defendants tell their friends this. With that chilling pronouncement hanging in the air, Buliosi had to compartmentalize. Back in the courtroom, the focus returned to the methodical, piece-by-piece construction of the case against Manson and his followers. The current objective, to inextricably link the Tate murder weapon to Spahn Ranch and ultimately to Charles Manson himself. Before the recess, Sergeant Lee from LAPD's Firearms and Explosives Unit had already delivered a critical blow, positively identifying a bullet recovered from Jay Sebring's body as having been fired from the .22 caliber high-standard revolver found by young Stephen Weiss. While other bullets from the Tate scene lacked sufficient markings for a positive match, Lee found nothing to rule out they too came from the same gun. But when Buliosi tried to question Lee about another crucial link, shell casings found at Spahn Ranch, Paul Fitzgerald, Patricia Krenwinkel's attorney, objected. The casings, he argued, were the product of an illegal search and thus inadmissible. Anticipating that just such an objection might be raised, Buliosi told Judge Older, I obtained George Spahn's permission on tape. Sergeant Calkins should have it. But Calkins, it turned out, didn't have the tape. He hadn't been able to locate it. After nearly a week, with the tape still missing, Buliosi had no choice but to call Calkins to the stand to testify that verbal permission had indeed been granted. Under cross-examination by Irving Knarek, Calkins denied the tape was lost or had disappeared. He simply couldn't find it. Judge Older, satisfied with Calkins' testimony, ruled the search valid. Buliosi had dodged a bullet. See what I did there? Sergeant Lee returned to the stand. Under a comparison microscope, he testified. A shell casing test fired from the murder weapon, and 15 of the shell casings recovered from Spahn Ranch showed identical firing pin compression marks. Through hours of highly technical testimony about stria, lands, grooves, and firing pin marks, punctuated by over 100 objections, mostly from Knarek, the prosecution had forged another link. The Tate murder gun was now definitively placed at Spahn Ranch. The next witness, Thomas Walleman, known as TJ, was a reluctant one. He drifted in and out of the family, drawn by the easy lifestyle but repelled by darker memories, particularly the night he saw Manson shoot a man named Bernard Crow. While Buliosi knew he couldn't introduce the Crow shooting itself during the guilt phase of the trial, he questioned TJ about the events leading up to it. TJ recalled Manson receiving a phone call, borrowing John Swartz's '59 Ford, and getting a revolver. TJ had accompanied Manson to an apartment building in Hollywood. There, Manson handed TJ the revolver and told him to put it in his belt before they both entered the apartment. That was as far as Buliosi could take that line of questioning. He then showed TJ the .22 caliber high-standard revolver recovered by Stephen Weiss. "Have you ever seen that particular revolver before?" TJ hedged. "I don't think so. It looks like it, but I don't know for sure, you know?" Buliosi pressed him. Under further questioning, TJ admitted the gun differed from the one he'd seen that night in only one respect. Half the grip was missing. "Now, your first statement," Buliosi reiterated, "was to the effect that you didn't think this was the revolver, and then you said it looked like it." "I mean, I don't know for sure whether it was the revolver," TJ repeated, "but it looks like it. There are a lot of those made." That little qualification didn't worry Buliosi. A previous witness from the manufacturer, High Standard, had already testified this particular model was relatively uncommon. Despite his hedging, TJ's testimony was dramatic. He was the first witness to directly connect Charles Manson to the murder weapon. That night, Buliosi received another call, this one from the LAPD. The news was sickening. Barbara Hoyt, the witness who had received death threats, was in a hospital in Honolulu. Someone had given her what was believed to be a lethal dose of LSD. Fortunately, she had been rushed to the hospital just in time. The full horrifying story emerged when Buliosi later spoke to Barbara. The pretty 17-year-old had fled Barker Ranch and returned home. Though she'd cooperated with investigators, she was terrified to testify. On September 5th, Manson girls Squeaky Fromm, Gypsy Cher, Catherine Weish-Gillies, and Clem Grogan contacted her. They offered her a free vacation in Hawaii if she agreed not to testify. Barbara tragically accepted. She spent that night at Spahn Ranch. The next day, Clem drove Barbara and Weish to a family hideout in North Hollywood, a house rented by a newer family member, Dennis Rice. Rice took the two girls to the airport, bought their tickets, gave them $50 in cash, and some credit cards, including, with a grim irony, a TWA getaway card. Using assumed names, Barbara and Weish flew to Honolulu and checked into the penthouse suite of the Hilton Hawaiian Village Hotel. Barbara saw little of Hawaii. Weish, paranoid the police were looking for Barbara, insisted they remain cooped up in the suite. During their confinement, Weish, once a close friend, spoke ominously. "We all have to go through helter-skelter," she told Barbara. "If we don't do it in our heads, we'll have to do it physically. If you don't die in your head, you'll die when it comes down." Weish also confided that Linda Kasabian was not long for this world, predicting she had, at most, 6 months to live. Each morning, around the same time, Weish made a long-distance call to a payphone near the Rice residence in North Hollywood. At least one of these calls was to Squeaky Fromm, the family's de facto leader in Manson's absence. On September 9th, just after her morning call, Weish's demeanor abruptly changed. "She became very serious and looked at me kind of strangely," Barbara recounted. Weish announced she had to return to California immediately, but Barbara was to stay in Hawaii. She booked herself on a 1:15 p.m. flight to Los Angeles. At the airport, Weish claimed she wasn't hungry but suggested Barbara eat. They went into a restaurant, and Barbara ordered a hamburger. When it arrived, Weish took it and went outside, telling Barbara to pay the check. Barbara lost sight of Weish for several minutes while waiting in line at the cash register. When Barbara came out, Weish handed her the hamburger. Barbara ate it as they waited for Weish's flight. Just before boarding, Weish made a chilling remark. "Imagine what it would be like if that hamburger had 10 tabs of acid in it." Barbara's response was, "Wow." She'd never heard of anyone taking more than 1 tab of LSD. The thought, she later said, was terrifying. After Weish departed, Barbara began to feel intensely high. She tried to take a bus to the beach, but became so violently ill she had to get off. Panicked, she started running and ran until she collapsed on a curb near the Salvation Army headquarters. By an incredible stroke of fortune, a social worker named Byron Galloway saw her. Galloway, employed at the state hospital, specialized in drug cases. Realizing the young girl was critically ill, he rushed her to Queens Medical Center. Her condition was diagnosed as acute psychosis, drug-induced. The examining doctor managed to get her name and Los Angeles address, but little else made sense. Hospital records noted, patient said, "Call Mr. Bogliogi and tell him I won't be able to testify today in the Sharon Tate trial." After emergency treatment, the hospital contacted the police and Barbara's parents. Her father flew to Hawaii and brought her back to Los Angeles the next day. Upon receiving the initial fragmented report, Buliosi's instructions to the LAPD were unequivocal. He wanted everyone involved charged with attempted murder. Since Barbara was a witness in the Tate case, the investigation was handed to Tate detectives Calkins and McGann. The Manson family's desperation was escalating to horrifying new levels. A witness threatened, then lured across an ocean and poisoned in a blatant attempt to silence her. The prosecution now faced not only a complex legal battle in the courtroom, but a sinister, life-threatening campaign of intimidation outside it. The question loomed larger than ever. Would justice prevail against such ruthless determination? The Manson trial continues its grim march, and the prosecution, led by Vincent Buliosi, is meticulously laying out its case. After a brief recess, court reconvened on September 10, 1970, with another key, albeit complicated, witness set to testify, Danny DeCarlo, a tough motorcyclist with deep ties to the family. We'll have our own brief recess here and be back in a minute. Though Buliosi knew Danny DeCarlo was afraid of Manson, Donkey Dan, as the girls in the family sometimes called him, did a good job of hiding it on the stand. When Charlie and the girls offered him smiles, he grinned right back. But Buliosi's initial concern about DeCarlo potentially qualifying his answers soon shifted dramatically, from the witness to the judge himself. As Buliosi attempted to establish the crucial relationship between Manson and Tex Watson through DeCarlo, and to introduce Manson's dinnertime conversations about his racial philosophies, Judge Older repeatedly sustained defense objections. Then, back in chambers, Judge Older dropped two remarks that left Buliosi utterly stunned. He asked, what is the relevance of whether or not Manson was the leader? And incredibly, he wanted an offer of proof as to the relevance of Helter Skelter. It was, Buliosi thought, as if Older hadn't even been present for the trial up to that point. Buliosi, more than a little disturbed, replied with thinly veiled exasperation. The offer of proof is that he used to say that he wanted to turn blacks against whites. Of course, this is only the motive for these murders. That is all it is. He continued, his frustration mounting. The prosecution is alleging Mr. Manson ordered these murders. It was his philosophy that led up to these murders. The motive for these murders was to ignite Helter Skelter. I think it is so obviously admissible that I am at a loss for words. Judge Older remained unconvinced. Over the noon hour, he instructed Buliosi, give some careful thought as to what you contend your proof is going to show. So far, I can't see any connection between what Mr. Manson believed about blacks and whites in the abstract and any motive. Buliosi sweated through that noon hour. This was critical. If he couldn't establish Manson's absolute domination over his followers, he couldn't convince the jury they'd killed on his orders. And if Judge Older blocked testimony from DeCarlo about Manson's black-white war philosophy, with heavyweight witnesses on that very topic like Paul Watkins still to come, the prosecution was in deep trouble. He returned to chambers armed with legal citations, making a long, impassioned plea. Yet Older still seemed unmoved. He couldn't see the relevance of Tex Watson's subservience to Manson, or why Buliosi was trying to show through DeCarlo that Tex had an easygoing, weak personality. The relevance, Buliosi knew, was paramount. Without establishing both, the jury might infer Watson, not Manson, had ordered the murders. I think the court can tell the relevancy, Buliosi retorted sharply, by the fact the defense counsel are on their hind legs trying to keep it out. Irving Kanarek, Manson's lawyer, shot back, I think the heart of what we have here is this, that Mr. Buliosi has lost his cool because he has a monomania about convicting Mr. Manson. He is charged with 7 murders, Buliosi declared, and I am going to be tenacious on this. I intend to go back with these witnesses and find out who Tex Watson was other than a name, Your Honor. I am not going to stop you from trying, Mr. Buliosi, Judge Older finally conceded, though his tone offered little reassurance. Back in court, Buliosi, steeling himself, asked DeCarlo the exact same question about Tex Watson's demeanor that had been blocked hours earlier. Kanarek objected. People versus Zollner, Your Honor, Buliosi cited, anticipating the inevitable sustained. He almost thought he was imagining it when Judge Older said, "Overruled. You may answer." DeCarlo replied, "He was happy-go-lucky. He was a nice guy. I liked Tex. He didn't have no temper or anything that I could see. He never said much." Buliosi glanced back. His junior deputies, Don Musick and Steve Kay, were staring in open-mouthed disbelief. Older had completely reversed himself. Working as fast as he could before the judge changed his mind again, Buliosi brought out that whenever Charlie told Tex to do anything, Tex did it. The domination issue seemed settled for now, but helter-skelter remained. Buliosi crossed his fingers and asked DeCarlo, "Do you recall Mr. Manson saying anything about blacks and whites?" Kanarek, stunned and perturbed, objected, "It is the same question that he was asking previously." "Overruled. You may answer," said the judge. "He didn't like black people," DeCarlo stated simply. He went on to testify that Manson wanted to see black people go to war with the police and the white establishment, whom Manson called pigs. Charlie had told him the pigs ought to have their throats cut and be hung up by their feet. DeCarlo had heard Manson use the term helter-skelter many, many times. Through all this, Kanarek objected repeatedly, often interrupting DeCarlo mid-sentence. Judge Older warned him, "You are interrupting, Mr. Kanarek. I have warned you several times today. I warn you now for the last time." "I don't wish to make unnecessary objections, Your Honor," Kanarek claimed. "Don't you? Then cease from doing it," Older snapped. Within minutes, Kanarek was at it again. Judge Older, his patience exhausted, called him to the bench. "You seem to have some sort of physical infirmity or mental disability that causes you to interrupt," Older said angrily. "No matter how many times I warn you, you seem to do it repeatedly. You are trying to disrupt the testimony of this witness. I am not going to put up with it any longer." Finding Kanarek in contempt of court, Older sentenced him to spend the upcoming weekend in the county jail. Danny DeCarlo, as Buliosi knew, had never really understood helter-skelter. His main interests at Spawn Ranch, he'd admitted, were booze and broads. He couldn't see how testifying about Manson's racial views really hurt Charlie, so he spoke freely. But when it came to the physical evidence, the knives, the rope, the gun, DeCarlo could see the direct link, and he pulled back, just enough to weaken his identifications. Buliosi had learned from DeCarlo that in early August 1969, Gypsy Cher had supposedly purchased 10 or 12 buck knives, which were then distributed at Spawn. DeCarlo described their dimensions, about 6 inches long, 1 inch wide, 1/8 inch thick, very close to the descriptions given by Linda Kasabian and Dr. Noguchi. Sheriff's reports from an August 16th raid on Spawn Ranch listed many seized weapons, including a submachine gun, but not a single buck knife. The logical presumption, Buliosi would later argue, was that the remaining buck knives were ditched after the murders. On the stand, DeCarlo confirmed the purchase, but qualified it. "I'm not sure. I think Gypsy did. I'm not sure." Regarding the Tate Sebring rope, DeCarlo testified it was similar to rope Manson had bought. "Does it appear to be different in any fashion?" Buliosi pressed. "No," DeCarlo conceded. DeCarlo had also told Buliosi that Charlie preferred knives and swords because guns could be heard from a distance in the desert. Buliosi asked if Manson had a favorite gun at Spawn. "Yes," DeCarlo said, "a high-standard .22 caliber buntline revolver." Buliosi showed him the murder weapon. "Have you ever seen this revolver before?" "I saw one similar to it." "Does it appear to differ in any fashion?" "The trigger guard is broken. Other than that, I can't be sure." "Why can't you be sure?" "I don't know. I don't know the serial number of it. I am not sure that is it." DeCarlo, who had cleaned, cared for, and shot that very gun, who had an extensive background in weapons and had even drawn a picture of it for the LAPD before knowing it was a murder weapon, should have been able to make a positive ID. Buliosi's suspected fear held him back. Despite these qualifications, Buliosi succeeded in getting a tremendous amount of crucial evidence in through DeCarlo. His direct examination, though interrupted by another 3-day recess, concluded on September 17th. That morning, Manson, through his attorneys Fitzgerald and Shin, requested to see Buliosi in the lockup during the noon recess. Kanarek wasn't present. "I just wanted you to know that I didn't have anything to do with the attempted murder of Barbara Hoyt," Manson said. "I don't know whether you ordered it or they did it on their own," Buliosi replied coolly, "but you know, and I know, that in either case they did it because they thought it would please you." Manson wanted to rap, but Buliosi cut him short. "I'm not really in the mood to talk to you, Charlie. Maybe if you have enough guts to take the stand, we'll talk then." Buliosi later checked on the Honolulu hamburger case, as the papers dubbed the Hoyt poisoning. Detectives McGann and Calkins hadn't found any evidence. Buliosi then assigned Phil Sartucci from the LaBianca team, who quickly turned in a detailed report on airline tickets, credit cards, and phone calls. However, it wouldn't be until December that the case went to the grand jury. In the meantime, Weish, Squeaky, Clem, Gypsy, and Dennis Rice remained free, often seen at the family's vigil outside the courthouse. Day Shin brought out DeCarlo's awareness of the $25,000 reward, implying a motive to lie. Kanarek pursued this and DeCarlo's fondness for weapons. Asked to describe his love for guns, DeCarlo's reply, "Well, I love them more than I do my old lady," brought the house down. Kanarek was trying to suggest DeCarlo, not Manson, was responsible for the arsenal at Spawn. He also hit hard on DeCarlo's drinking and vagueness with dates, highlighting DeCarlo's prior testimony that he was smashed 99% of the time at Spawn. This, the defense could argue, meant DeCarlo couldn't accurately perceive or recall events. Unfortunately for the defense, Fitzgerald unintentionally undermined this by asking DeCarlo to differentiate drunk from smashed. DeCarlo explained, "My version of drunk is when I'm out to lunch on the ground. Smashed is just when I'm walking around loaded." Danny DeCarlo, a man caught between fear and a certain roguish bravado, has added more critical pieces to the prosecution's puzzle. The courtroom battles with Judge Older over fundamental aspects of the case underscore the immense pressure on Vincent Buliosi, while Irving Kanarek's antics earn him a weekend in jail. And outside the courtroom, the shadow of the family and their attempts to manipulate justice continues to loom large. It's September 18, 1970, and the Manson trial, already a maelstrom of shocking testimony and legal skirmishes, is about to deliver another surprise. That afternoon, a new figure walked into the courtroom, a name invoked countless times in relation to the horrific Tate LaBianca murders: Charles "Tex" Watson. After a protracted 9-month extradition battle, Watson had finally been returned to California on September 11th. Sergeants Sartucci and Gutierrez, who flew with him, described Watson as speaking little, mostly staring vacantly, having lost about 30 pounds, much of it as his return to Los Angeles became inevitable. Now, Paul Fitzgerald, Patricia Krenwinkel's attorney, had requested Watson be brought into court, ostensibly to see if the previous witness, Danny DeCarlo, could identify him. Irving Kanarek, Manson's lawyer, objected strenuously, sensing a serious mistake, but Judge Older granted the removal order. The jury was still out when Watson entered. He offered a slight smile to the 3 female defendants, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, who grinned and blew him kisses in return. He seemed, however, utterly oblivious to Charles Manson's presence. By the time the jury filed in, Watson was seated, appearing like any other spectator. Fitzgerald began. "Mr. DeCarlo, you previously testified that a man by the name of Tex Watson was present at Spawn Ranch. Is that correct?" "Yeah," DeCarlo affirmed. "Do you recognize Mr. Watson in this courtroom?" "Yeah, right over there," Danny said, pointing to Tex. The jurors, palpably curious, strained to see the man they had heard so much about. "Could I have this gentleman identify himself for the court, Your Honor?" Fitzgerald requested. Judge Older instructed Watson to stand and state his name. A bailiff had to motion Watson to his feet. He stood but remained mute. The moment Watson rose, Fitzgerald's blunder was glaringly obvious. One look, and the jury knew. This Charles "Tex" Watson was not the type to order Charles Manson to do anything, let alone mastermind 7 murders. He looked closer to 20 than 25, with short hair, wearing a blue blazer, gray slacks, and a tie. Instead of the wild-eyed monster some might have imagined from earlier, drug-fueled mugshots, He appeared to be a typical, clean-cut college kid. Offstage, Watson could be painted as the heavy. Having seen him now, Buliosi doubted the jury would ever think that again. Amidst the courtroom drama, Prosecutor Vincent Buliosi maintained a precarious line of communication with some family members, particularly Sandy Good and Squeaky Fromm. They would occasionally visit his office. Buliosi made time for these visits, partly to understand their devotion, but also holding a remote hope that if another murder was planned, one of them might alert him. He knew they wouldn't go to the police. He had more hope for Sandy than Squeaky. Squeaky was on a power trip as Manson's unofficial spokesperson, while Sandy had shown minor rebellions against Manson's wishes, like going to a hospital to have her baby. Months earlier, Sandy had visited Buliosi's office. He'd challenged her on the family credo. She claimed it was peace. He countered it was murder. "People are being murdered every day in Vietnam," she'd retorted. Buliosi had pressed her. "Assuming for the sake of argument that the deaths in Vietnam are murders, how does this justify murdering 7 more people?" He then implored her, "Sandy, if you really believe in peace and love, the next time murder is in the wind at Spawn Ranch, I want you to do everything possible to prevent it from happening." She had quietly replied yes. Buliosi had hoped she meant it. That hope vanished when he learned from Barbara Hoyt that Sandy was among those who persuaded Barbara to take that ill-fated trip to Hawaii. As Buliosi left court on the afternoon of September 18th, Sandy and 2 male followers approached him. "Sandy, I'm very, very disappointed in you," Buliosi told her directly. "You were at Spawn when Barbara's murder was planned. Though Barbara was your friend, you said nothing, did nothing. Why?" Sandy stared at him as if in a trance. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached down and began playing with the sheath knife at her waist. That was her answer. Disgusted, Buliosi turned and walked away. But looking back, he saw Sandy and the 2 men were following him. He stopped. They stopped. He started walking. They followed, Sandy still fingering her knife, gradually closing the distance. Deciding it was better to face trouble head-on, Buliosi turned and walked back towards them. "Listen, you goddamn bitch, and listen good," he seethed. "I don't know for sure whether you were or weren't involved in the actual attempt to murder Barbara, but if you were, I'm going to do everything in my power to see that you end up in jail." He then told the 2 men if they followed him again, he'd deck them on the spot. He turned and walked off. This time, they didn't follow. His reaction, Buliosi felt, was exceptionally mild under the circumstances. Irving Kanarek felt otherwise. When court reconvened on Monday, the 21st, he filed a motion to have Buliosi held in contempt for interfering with a defense witness and arrested for making obscene remarks in the presence of a female. Judge Older, finding nothing contemptuous in Sandra Good's declaration, dismissed Kanarek's motions. Again, Manson asked to see Buliosi in the lockup. He hoped Buliosi wasn't taking all this, the attempted murder, the knife incident, the trial, personally. "No, Charlie," Buliosi replied. "I was assigned to this case. This is my job." Manson then argued it should be obvious the girls were acting on their own. When Buliosi raised a skeptical eyebrow, Manson offered a chilling hypothetical. "Look, Buliosi, if I had all the power and control that you say I have, I could simply say, 'Brenda, go get Buliosi,' and that would be it." It struck Buliosi that Manson had singled out Brenda McCann, also known as Nancy Pittman, as his chief assassin. He would have good reason to recall those remarks later. "Nothing personal," Manson had said. But immediately after, the middle-of-the-night hang-up calls to Buliosi's home began, continuing even after he changed his unlisted number. Several times, leaving the Hall of Justice at night, he was followed by family members, including Sandy. One time particularly disturbed him. His wife Gail and their children were circling the block in the car. Afraid they'd be identified, he pretended not to see Gail, who quickly sized up the situation and drove around until he could shake his followers. The threats escalated. One afternoon, apparently enraged by ongoing testimony about his domination, Manson told a bailiff, "I'm going to have Buliosi and the judge killed." By telling a bailiff, Manson ensured the message was received. Judge Older was already under protection. The next day, the district attorney's office assigned Buliosi a bodyguard for the trial's duration. Additional precautions were taken, including a walkie-talkie in his home for instant police communication if the phone lines were cut. It was no secret several defense attorneys were also frightened. Dae Shin reportedly kept loaded guns in every room. Manson, according to another defense attorney, often put Kanarek at the top of his kill list, supposedly saying it was only fair since Kanarek was killing him in court. At one point, Manson had Fitzgerald draw up papers to fire Kanarek, who then reportedly begged Manson with tears in his eyes not to dismiss him. Manson relented. Despite Kanarek's multitudinous objections, the trial moved with surprising speed. Buliosi had cut his witness list from 100 to about 80. Some days saw half a dozen witnesses. He even used Danny DeCarlo to list the family members' names and approximate ages, making it apparent that Manson, being older, was unlikely to have played a subservient role. A small victory for Buliosi came through an unexpected assist from the defense. When Buliosi called Sheriff's Deputy William Gleason to testify that no buck knives were found during the August 16th Spawn Ranch raid, implying they'd been ditched post-murders, Kanarek objected, and Older sustained it. Buliosi had almost given up when Paul Fitzgerald, apparently thinking the absence of such knives helped the defense, asked on cross-examination, "Did you find any buck knives at the Spawn Ranch on the date of August the 16th, 1969? "No, sir," Gleason replied. The information was in. The family's attempt to silence Barbara Hoyt had backfired spectacularly. Once a reluctant witness, she was now very willing to testify. Barbara confirmed Linda Kasabian's story about watching the news of the Tate murders on TV. She also recalled that on the night of the Tate murders, Sadie Atkins had called her on the field phone, asking her to bring 3 sets of dark clothing to the front of the ranch. When Barbara arrived, Manson told her they already left. This was powerful evidence of Manson's involvement. Getting in the Myers Ranch conversation was another battle. After a half-day argument, Buliosi was only allowed part of it. One afternoon in early September 1969, Barbara, napping at Myers Ranch, awoke to hear Sadie and Weish talking in the kitchen. Thinking Barbara was asleep, Sadie told Weish that Sharon Tate had been the last to die because she had to watch the others die. This much, Buliosi got in. What he couldn't get in, due to the Aranda rule preventing a defendant's statement implicating a co-defendant from being used against that co-defendant, was the rest. Sadie detailing Abigail Folger's escape, Katie Krenwinkel catching her, and Tex Watson running over to help stab Abigail. In chambers, Dae Shin, Atkins' attorney, inadvertently admitted his client's presence at Tate, complaining that omitting references to co-defendants put the onus for all 5 murders on Susan. "But other people were there too, Your Honor," Shin had said. "Were they?" Buliosi had quipped. Through Barbara, Buliosi brought in numerous examples of Manson's domination and his helter-skelter conversations. The one thing he couldn't initially get in was the family's attempt to poison her. During cross-examination, Kanarek attacked Barbara's morals and, bizarrely, her eyesight. Knowing she had poor vision, he had her remove her glasses and try to count his raised fingers from across the courtroom. "How many can you see now?" he'd ask. 3, she'd reply. "May the record reflect she said 3 and I have 2 up clearly, Your Honor," Kanarek would boom. "I thought I saw your thumb," Judge Older once remarked. Kanarek proved Barbara had bad eyesight, but it was irrelevant. She'd heard the Myers Ranch conversation, not seen it. Then Kanarek asked Barbara, "Have you been in any mental hospital for the last couple of years?" Ordinarily, Buliosi would object. Not this time. Kanarek had just opened the door. On redirect, arguing Kanarek had implied Barbara was in a mental hospital for an extended period, Buliosi got Older's permission to clarify she was in a mental ward only overnight and not for a mental problem, though he couldn't ask who gave her the LSD. "Did you take this overdose voluntarily?" Buliosi asked. "No." "Was it given to you by someone else?" "Yes." "Were you near death?" Kanarek objected. "Sustained." It was good enough, Buliosi thought. The jury could put 2 and 2 together. On Saturday, September 26, 1970, a raging fire swept Southern California. Spawn's movie ranch burned to the ground. As ranch hands tried to save horses, the Manson girls, faces illuminated by the inferno, danced and clapped, crying happily, "Helter Skelter is coming down! Helter Skelter is coming down!" The next witness was Juan Flynn, and we'll hear about that after this quick break. Juan Flynn, the manure shoveler from Spahn Ranch, took the stand next, seemingly enjoying himself and openly showing animosity towards Manson, glaring back when Charlie tried to stare him down. After identifying the .22 revolver, Juan remarked how Manson had once fired it in his direction because he was walking with a girl Manson fancied. Much of this anecdote was struck, but Juan seeing Manson fire the revolver remained. Flynn then delivered two crucial pieces of testimony. One night in early August 1969, Sadie Atkins, dressed in black, told him, "We're gonna get some fucking pigs." Then got into Johnny Swartz's yellow Ford with Charlie, who was driving, Clem, Tex, Linda, and Leslie. The time, participants, vehicle, and clothing color all matched Linda Kasabian's account of the night the LaBiancas were killed. Then, Juan testified to the kitchen conversation a day or so later when Manson, holding a knife to his throat, snarled, "You son of a bitch! Don't you know I'm the one who's doing all of these killings?" The newsmen scrambled for the exits. Headline, "Manson admitted murders, Spahn Ranch cowboy claims." Older, however, excluded other damaging testimony from Flynn. Manson instructing Juan to tie up people in a rich house so we'll come in and cut the motherfucking pigs up, a dress rehearsal for the murders. Also excluded, Manson telling Juan Adolf Hitler had the best answer to everything. On cross, Fitzgerald and Kanarek highlighted that Flynn stuck around Spahn despite alleged threats. Kanarek also accused Flynn of fabricating the knife-to-throat story for the courtroom. Flynn mentioned telling officers in Shoshone about it earlier. This became critical. That evening, Buliosi tracked down CHP officer Dave Stuber, who confirmed he'd interviewed Flynn in Shoshone on December 19, 1969, and taped the 9-hour conversation where Flynn recounted Manson's admission. Stuber had even given a copy of the tapes to LAPD, but they'd apparently been mislaid without being listened to or booked into evidence. In another unbelievable exhibition of incompetence, a taped interview of a witness containing a statement in which Manson implied that he was responsible for the Tate LaBianca murders wasn't booked into evidence, had gone missing, and as far as can be determined, nobody ever bothered to listen to it. Ordinarily, a prior consistent statement isn't admissible, but Kanarek, by charging recent fabrication, had opened the door. The defense also opened the door for Flynn to explain why he hadn't gone to authorities sooner. He was in fear of his life due to threat notes and harassment. Because Kanarek questioned Flynn about Manson's programming, Buliosi brought in Manson's explanation of unprogramming followers, including a sexually explicit detail about the girls that Judge Older struck as non-responsive. During a heated exchange where Kanarek again implied Buliosi coached Flynn, Buliosi lost his temper. "Oh, stop arguing," he snapped, "then be quiet." Judge Older found Buliosi in direct contempt and fined him $50. The deputy DAs later reimbursed him via a Buliosi defense fund. Now, every attorney in the trial had been cited or threatened with contempt. When Hughes, for the defense, tried to ridicule Flynn's fear of a locked-up Manson, Juan spoke for perhaps all prosecution witnesses. Well, not of Mr. Manson himself, but the reach that he has, you know. Manson's outbursts continued to disrupt the trial. On October 2nd, after being ordered removed, he turned to the spectators. "Look at yourselves. You're going to destruction. It's your judgment day, not mine." The pattern had become clear, too. The more damaging the testimony, the more likely Manson would disrupt proceedings, ensuring that he, rather than the evidence, dominated the headlines. Flynn's testimony was devastating to Manson's case. Multiple times during Flynn's testimony, Judge Older removed Manson and his co-defendants due to their disruptions. When another outburst occurred on October 2nd, Manson addressed the spectators. "Look at yourselves. Where are you headed? You're headed toward destruction." He displayed that peculiar smile of his before adding, "This is your judgment day, not mine." The women echoed Manson's words, prompting Older to remove all 4 defendants. Eventually, the Stuber tape turned up, and Judge Older ruled that Canarek's charge of recent fabrication allowed it to be played. Officer Stuber set up the tape player. The jurors then heard Juan Flynn's voice from December 1969, nearly a year earlier, telling the exact same story they'd heard from him on the stand. Then he was looking at me real funny, and then he grabbed me by the hair like that, and he put a knife by my throat. And then he says, "Don't you know I'm the one committing all these murders?" The chilling words from an old tape recording hang in the courtroom, a powerful echo of Manson's alleged confession. With each witness, each piece of evidence, the prosecution builds its case, while outside the courtroom, the family's desperate and dangerous machinations continue. The trial is far from over, and the stakes only get higher. Throughout this story, we have spoken about a catalog of police errors and incompetence, but it should be noted that Officer Stuber had been investigating a stolen auto report, not murder, when he talked to Flynn, Poston, Crockett, and Watkins in Shoshone. However, realizing the importance of their story, he had spent over 9 hours quizzing them on their knowledge of Manson and his family. After the trial, Buliosi wrote a letter to the California Highway Patrol, commending Stuber for the excellent job he had done. So there's a nugget of information that should warm Tom Wood's heart. Monday, October 5th, 1970. Bailiff Bill Murray later recalled sensing trouble brewing. Working with prisoners daily develops an intuition, he explained, and when he escorted Manson to the holding cell, he noticed unusual tension and agitation. Despite offering no guarantees of proper behavior, Older granted the defendants another opportunity, allowing their return to the courtroom. The testimony that followed was routine and unremarkable. Nothing suggested its significance, though Buliosi suspected Charlie might have guessed his strategy. Through multiple witnesses, he was systematically undermining Manson's expected alibi defense. LASO detective Paul Whiteley had completed his testimony, and defense counsel had waived cross-examination. When Manson spoke up, "May I question him, Your Honor?" "No, you may not," said Judge Older. Manson replied, "You intend to use this courtroom as my execution chamber?" Older dismissed the witness. Manson repeated his question, adding, "I'll fight for my life one way or another. You should allow me to do so with words." "If you don't stop, I'll have you removed," Older replied. Manson then said, "I'll have you removed if you don't stop. I have a little system of my own." Only then did Buliosi realize Manson wasn't performing. He was deadly earnest. Judge Older said, "Call your next witness." "Sergeant Gutierrez," Buliosi announced. Manson interrupted, "Do you think I'm bluffing?" What followed happened faster than words can capture. Gripping a pencil in his right hand, Manson vaulted over the counsel table toward Judge Older. He landed within feet of the bench, dropping to one knee. As he struggled to stand, Bailiff Bill Murray launched himself onto Manson's back. 2 additional deputies joined the struggle, restraining Manson's arms. As they forced him toward the lockup, Manson shrieked at Older, "In the name of Christian justice, someone should cut your head off." Adding to the chaos, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten rose and began chanting in Latin. Older, calmer than anticipated, gave them multiple opportunities to stop before ordering their removal as well. According to the bailiffs, Manson continued fighting even in the lockup, requiring 4 men to restrain and handcuff him. Fitzgerald asked if counsel may approach the bench. Judge Older described his perception of the incident. Fitzgerald asked about the judge's mental state. Judge Older replied, "He appeared to be attacking me." Fitzgerald said, "I feared as much, and while—" Judge Older interrupted, "One more step and I would have defended myself." Given the judge's state of mind, Fitzgerald moved for a mistrial. Hughes, Shin, and Canarek supported the motion. Older responded, "It won't be that simple, Mr. Fitzgerald. They won't benefit from their misconduct. Motion denied." Later, Murray measured Manson's leap out of curiosity, 10 feet. Murray wasn't surprised. Manson possessed remarkable leg and arm strength from constant exercise in his cell. When asked why he trained so intensively, he once told a bailiff, "I'm preparing myself for the desert." Murray attempted to recreate the leap. Without adrenaline, he couldn't even jump onto the counsel table, never mind over it. Though Judge Older instructed the jury to disregard what you witnessed and heard this morning, for sure, they would never forget it. All pretense had vanished. They had seen Charles Manson's true nature. From a reliable source, Buliosi learned that Judge Older began carrying a .38 caliber revolver beneath his robes, both in court and chambers. Judgment Day. The phrase echoed through whispered conversations among the women gathered outside. Wait for Judgment Day. That's when Helter Skelter truly begins. Judgment Day. What did it mean? A prison break? A campaign of revenge? Equally important was the timing. The day of the jury's verdict. Guilty or not guilty? Or if guilty, when they decided between life and death. Perhaps sentencing day itself? Or could it be tomorrow? Judgment Day. The phrase appeared with increasing frequency. What nobody outside the family knew was that Judgment Day's first phase had already commenced with the theft of a case of hand grenades from Camp Pendleton Marine Base. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Steve McQueen, and Tom Jones. What did they all have in common? They were all on Susan Atkins' death list. In the next episode, we'll hear the gruesome descriptions of how Susan Atkins was going to kill them. But in the meantime, after this quick break, we'll hear from our own celebrity crime experts, Simon and Tom.
Thank you, Alec. For goodness sake, he's starting to get a bit familiar like that last lot where that we hired Tom. Celebrity crime expert this week, he's calling us. I can understand him calling me that, but I don't know why he called us both. Tom, I was struck this week with these antics. You know, we talked about it last week because the trial was protracted by any stretch. Yeah. It went on and on and on. And it's actually a miracle that got to the end. It got to a completion of this trial because there's so much going on. I think the prosecution did a fantastic job to keep it on track. They were constantly battling against the carving in his head, attempts to represent himself, staring down the jury and the prosecution. And what do we get in this episode? He jumps up and starts trying to attack the judge.
I wondered about that. You know what it put me in mind of, Simon? It put me in mind of the O.J. Simpson trial, which was seen as a landmark in American justice, but only because it was televised. And this reminded me of very similar antics, 100 objections. You know, the other thing that struck me really forcibly was this blatant intimidation of witnesses. The family hanging about outside, staring people down, barracking people. That would never have been allowed in our justice system. Quite often we've had to clear the High Court in a gangster trial where all the supporters and families come in. The court has been cleared. So it's remarkable that that was allowed to go on. And there's a part in episode 23 which strongly suggests that the judge just doesn't get it, see it. Yeah. It doesn't register with the judge for some reason. But I thought that was interesting. And I'll tell you another thing, after this is finished, and Alex has done a fantastic job. I mean, he has got a bit cheeky, you're right, but he's done a wonderful job on this. And I was wondering, once this is finished, and once he'd had a couple of weeks off, because I think he deserves it, we should maybe ask him to look at O.J. Simpson. Because with Alex intensity and Alex research prowess and Alex perspective, I think there's perhaps a lot about O.J. Simpson that we don't know.
Because, I think you're right, Tom. I think what this is teaching us is that whether we like it or not, we really just digest what we get through the media. Much more so then, because they only had certain sources. They didn't have 24-hour news. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have the tools that we've got today. You were pretty much faced with what you got in the 6 o'clock news and the front page of the newspaper. So what we knew about this was minuscule compared with the detail that we've got into here with Alec. I think you're right about O.J. And lots of other cases too.
The thing is this, Simon, isn't it daft? Because we of all people know that when we read the press report of a case we've been involved in, we go, nah, no, you've missed half the story. You've missed the point. So if that's true of cases we know about, why would it not be true of cases that we don't?
You're absolutely right.
In fact, we watch the television. Oh, that's the story of O.J. Simpson. It's the glove, it's the car chase, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And we take all that in as fact. And that frames, I think we owe it to our listeners to take a deep dive into some of these famous cases that we think we know about.
Mm-hmm.
And O.J. Simpson would be a good start because American justice is kind of framed, isn't it? You've got Charlie Manson in one hand with all the celebs. And then at the other end, you've got televised trial. With the Manson case, you've got a sort of circus, a sort of show trial of a different kind. But with O.J. Simpson, you've got everything played out on
Tom, I think
television.
you've just made the perfect case for me to get my expenses claim in early and get my trip to California extended in order that I can do proper research while I'm over there into this.
Well, you really should. And, of course, the place you should go, the place you have to go and touch base are the Kardashian family.
Now
Because
we're
it was,
talking.
of course, it was through the OJ trial, really, that the Kardashians came to fame. So, there you go, Simon.
Yeah.
There's a wee clue for you,
Perfect.
my boy.
And you know I'll fit right in that scene.
Well, you'll certainly look the part. If there is a wee chance of cosmetic surgery, Simon, take it. Take it. Take it. Embrace it, Simon.
Account I'll be running up over there.
Listen, I think they'll treat you for free as some kind of experiment. They could have a before and after. You know, and I can imagine how good this is. We could turn this ugly. You know, you get the thing. You get the thing.
I think the tape jumped there. Yeah, I get the thing. I get the thing.
No,
if you're
seriously.
paying, I don't care.
Well, I think that could be your motto, actually. If you could maybe get a family crest made up with that on it. If you're paying, I don't care.
Sounds good. Tom, another thing that struck me this episode 23, and it's been building up over the course of this trial, it's important that we put ourselves back as best we can to that era, when all we've got to go on really is the history that we have, that we can read and listen to now, and the witnesses from then that we can talk to, because none of us were old enough and involved in law enforcement to know what was really going on. I think this trial was a symptom of its time here in the UK. The courts here would have been absolutely horrified at any of this loud talking or anything going on in the court. It would be like forensic in our courts over here, so institutionalised and so class-orientated. And this is to do with drugs, it's psychedelia, it's things that nobody had ever foreseen coming. On the back of the Vietnam War and the revolution of that generation, they were living their lives and discarding the traditions and values of their parents.
Yeah, that's right. You know, when you look at our judicial system and our courts, you could put them right back in the 19th century and not really notice a difference.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of that is that our courts have managed to maintain a degree of order and manners and respect. There's something to be said for them. When you compare it against this free-for-all.
I don't think this lawyer would have lasted 10 minutes here. The other lawyers would have seen to that, because that's not the way it's done.
No.
That's not the way you behave.
No, Canaric wouldn't have been able to operate like that over here. No. But it's interesting because I noticed in this trial, Canaric's behaviour is actually working because Buliosi is really forced to cut his witness list. He's forced to cut his list because he knows that the longer this trial goes on, the more likelihood there is of a legal faux pas, and the more likelihood is that the whole trial just loses focus and drifts off. So actually, Charlie Manson's selection of Canaric as a solicitor was quite a shrewd one, because he plays it long, he makes a nuisance of himself, and he allows Charlie Manson to step forward and be the star of the show. Yeah. And Buliosi has had to respond to that time-wasting and extension of the trial by actually cutting witnesses. Now, when you start to cut witnesses in a well-prepared trial, that can be a recipe for disaster. And I've been at the end of that with the first World's End murder trial in 2007. That's exactly what happened. The witnesses were cut for expediency's sake, evidence was lost, and the thing was a disaster.
Because there's no going back, Tom. There's no going back when you make a decision.
That's right. The Buliosi is forced into that move, and that's a gamble.
Yeah. It's a great insight into court tactics and all the rest of it, isn't it? One thing I wanted to cover with you, because I'm conscious that Crime Time Inc. listeners will be noticing the difference between the American law system and ours, and all across the world we've got different systems and different standards, if you like, although a lot of that is based on Scots law, as you and I know. The one I wanted to touch on with you was illegal search, because we hear it in just about every Hollywood film, the term that they always use.
Probable cause.
Probable cause. We don't call it that here, of course, but we're still restricted by the same laws and the same fairness to accused, all the rest of it, that you have to have reason, even for stopping to search someone's vehicle, to search a person on the street. These things aren't just random, just like stopping a suspected drunk driver. You have to show that you had cause to do that.
Yep.
And they're late. What did you make of this illegal search here that the defence tried to do to try and get the murder weapon discarded?
Yeah, but if you think about this, Simon, it had to be. You think about what's led up to this. You've had months of different law enforcement agencies blundering about, and I use the word advisedly, blundering about, doing things in an uncoordinated fashion. It's only Buliosi that latterly has tied the strings together. But the point is that during all that blundering and faffing about in the early stages of the investigation, the procedural problems, the procedural difficulties have all been sewn in.
Yeah.
So it's actually a marvellous piece of prosecution that Buliosi has managed to tie this all together in the fashion that he has.
Yeah, against all the intimidation and all the rest of it that's going on.
Yeah.
The judge has now got 24-hour protection. These threats are real, aren't they? They're in the real world with these family members that are making them.
They are, but I wonder in the United States, we'll have to ask Alex this, if Alex is listening. Over here we have a thing called attempting to pervert the course of justice. If we had a situation where the Manson family or the Manson family here in Scotland were trying to intimidate witnesses in an ongoing trial, especially a murder trial, then they would have been arrested and they would have been appearing before a judge on the first lawful day from custody, charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice, i.e. interfering with a trial. I can only conclude that either they don't have these same powers in the United States or for some reason didn't choose to enact them. But I can't understand why not, because as you say, Simon, the intimidation is real, very real.
Yeah. Because what we've got Manson carving himself in his head, the madness, the manipulation. We're talking about a defence team that's more like cheerleaders than lawyers, and a cult family outside the courthouse singing, making threats at people going into the court. We've seen plenty of scumbags in the dock over the years, Tom, but this was power play, really, wasn't it? It was verging. Alex used a word during this episode that I thought was quite provoking and interesting: terrorism. It was verging on trying to terrorise the court, the officials of the court, and certainly the witnesses.
Yeah, we use the word terrorism now to describe political terrorism, but there are other kinds of terrorism. And I think you're right. I think that falls squarely into that category. Yeah, I do.
It reminded me that the illegal search thing, Tom, I had a wee story when I was in the drugs unit. We were watching a house for a delivery of drugs, mainly heroin, but it turned out lots of drugs. A well-known criminal that lived up the high flats there. Mm-hmm. And we watched the house from a very safe distance, binoculars. In fact, we were in a hotel looking out a hotel window and saw the delivery, knew the delivery had been made, and saw that he had a safe house. And he was coming out onto his veranda and going next door to a property we knew nothing about. We realised this is where the stuff was being taken to be cut, organised and stashed. So when we hit his house, I got a sheriff's warrant, and we hit the safe house rather than his house. Mm-hmm. We took the door off its hinges. 4 or 5 of us stormed into the house, and there was an old lady sitting watching the television with her hearing aid off and her knitting in her lap. And she got the fright of her life. And what had happened was the makeup of the flats, the interior. Right. And these are high flats. But what we didn't realise was the one at the gable end of the high flats, all the ones down that gable end were for elderly people, infirm people. Right. So they had no stairs in them.
Right.
And whereas the other flats on the landing had interior staircases. Yeah. So the safe house was actually the one above where we were with the old lady. We could hear footsteps up there, and he'd probably heard the commotion downstairs. A long story short, we went straight upstairs, kicked that door in, and made a fantastic haul of not just drugs, but a lot of stolen property. But we'd no warrant for that safe house. It went to the High Court. Initially, it was no proed by the fiscal. I went to my boss and said, we should go and speak to the fiscal about this. We did. We got it to trial and we got a conviction. I think it was a stated case. There's a lot of processes to a stated case, but it went some way towards that because the judge found that we were acting in good faith.
Yeah, there's a general rule that there is a stated case about this, and it centred around a search warrant for a specific thing, but while they were executing the warrant, they found something else. It was a weapon, and it was judged that in good faith, it was reasonable to do what they did. This reasonableness runs through a lot of the case law of Scotland. Was it reasonable? Yes, it was. So I'm more interested in what you said to the old lady. Did you say, good afternoon, we're the community services from Strathclyde Police. We couldn't help but notice that your door is insecure. We have brought some screws to fix your door. And
if only we'd had a deputy chief constable with us to think up. What actually happened was we were busy calming her down because she got the absolute fright of her life, the old soul, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And we were busy calming her down when her son arrived. And he might still be shouting at the cops that I left at the scene to get it sorted out. I don't know.
I once, when I was a very young uniformed cop working at a busy station in the north of Edinburgh, and this woman came in and said that my man's lying in the hall and he's no moving. The old sergeant said to me, Thomas, go with Mrs. So we went down the house and we went into the stair and she's in a panic because when the stair, there's the door. Oh, the door's locked. So I had kicked the door off. And we goes in and she says, I'm in the wrong stair. Oh, God. So anyway, we went and we found the guy and we got an ambulance. He survived.
You didn't make that up in the spur of the moment. You'd done it before.
So anyway, that evening, so what I did was I went back and using my trusty baton, I managed to fix the door lock, just the Yale lock, you see. But it was a bit shaky. But that night, I thought, I better sort this. So I went back later and I knocked the door, saw the light on, knocked, and this woman comes to the door. And I said, listen, I'm really sorry, but there would be a terrible mistake and that your door was forced, I didn't actually say I'd forced it. I said the door was forced, And she said, oh, that's all right, Stan. No matter, didn't matter, Stan. She was quite happy. In that station, we used to have a sort of a joinery kit. We had some screws and screwdrivers and a hammer and a saw and bits and pieces like that for just such an occasion.
Scenario.
And the old sergeant used to get absolutely mad with us if we kicked the door off the hinges and not the lock, because that was a professional thing. But I know it's a bit late now, Simon, because you're past that stage of the career. But I always found when you were doing a job like that, to get a set of plans of the buildings so you could see where the stairs were and whatnot. That's the sort of recommended way of doing it.
Or ask someone. Ask the Janny. All these flats had concierge and all the rest of it. Hindsight's a great thing.
So listen, some of them were really difficult. I remember being sent off my car beat to attend a call at a huge block of flats, and I couldn't find the address. I met a man coming up the stairs, and I said, excuse me, I'm looking for 20/F/3, such and such, so-and-so. He says, son, I've lived here for 20 years. I can find my own way home, and that's it. It was so confusing.
Yeah, the postman knew. I think he knew anyway.
I'm not sure about that.
Tom, there's so much in episode 23. Tex Watson's coming back. What about the LSD tabs? 10 tabs in your burger. I've known people to have problems with LSD because they maybe took 1.5 or 2. 10 LSD tabs. She had little chance.
you get tragedies. I mean, I was involved in quite a lot of drug death stuff in my time. And you got these kids going to a pop concert and somebody sells them a tab.
Yeah.
And they overheat and they die,
Yeah.
with one.
Yes.
So
That's why we started having water at all these nightclubs and raves
absolutely.
to try and cool them down.
But the other thing to say is that by definition, illegal drugs are completely random. So you can get...
you don't know what it is.
No, you could get an LSD tablet, which is 10 times the strength of another one.
I don't really want to put that out there.
No, that's right. I'll tell you what, an awful lot of people not only have died as a consequence of LSD, but worse than that. There's a tragic story of Peter Green, you know, the Fleetwood Mac guy, the great blues guitarist.
Yeah.
I mean, he took a bad trip and he was never the same again. Never the same again.
And he wrote The Green Man Militia. Another one was Sid Barrett of Pink Floyd.
Right, I didn't know.
He had a bad trip and he was never out in asylum for long thereafter. Very dangerous.
Absolutely. I think the trial is reaching a critical stage because the killer evidence is being led.
Yeah.
And it's really a choice now whether the disruption of the trial, the deliberate disruption of the trial, overwhelms the whole judicial system and actually turns it into a circus rather than a judicial exercise.
Because it's creeping forward, isn't it? You've got T.G. Wallerman, very damning evidence about what Manson had told him about shooting other people.
Yeah.
We've got the gun now identified as being the murder weapon, and we can connect it to Manson. So it's all these strands coming together and all the circus that's going round about it. Get credit to the jury for hanging on in there, because they could have been totally sidetracked by this, and they must have been scared to some degree as well of what might happen going into the court or at the hotel they were living at.
Yeah, we don't talk as much about the juries maybe we should. The jury have been held in custody for all this time.
Nice hotel, though.
Well, maybe, but...
The ambassador.
But even so, wow.
Yes. It's very intimidating for them too. Episode 23, I mean, brilliant. And it leads right in. We must be getting close to the end of the trial. And I think Charlie's antics now are becoming more and more desperate as well.
Very much so. And so are the families. The families are becoming much more desperate. But of course, as people get desperate, so the risk rises. And Buliosi and the court and the local police must have been aware of that.
Yeah. Good, Tom. We'll speak soon after Alex gives us episode 24 here in Crime Time Inc.